Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Spotlight, the first Spotlight in September 2025. Can you believe it? It's amazing. Every day I wake up and I say, gosh, time really does travel fast. Anyway, so today we're talking about a really exciting thing, and it's not sort of a downbeat thing. It's actually a really exciting thing. It's really great potential for something good. But we're talking about fraud. That's right, fraud. And so fraud is like so ever present. And it really affects the disclosure movement, the UFO and disclosure movement, everything like that. It's so big, and it's the major reason why humanity is still enslaved. So we're going to talk about why that's the case and what's going on. So I'm going to focusing now on the UAP or the UFO disclosure movement and remote viewing disclosure movement. But I'm going to be talking about the issue of fraud, and I'm going to give a couple examples here, but I can't use names because of legal reasons and so on. But I'm going to be able to give some examples. And so here's a few examples. Let's start by talking about some sort of low key. Now, I am not trying to pick on any particular person. This is a way bigger problem than just individual people. So I don't really care about individual people, what they're doing. They are here today, one day, gone the next day, so it's okay. But let me just give you an example of this type of thing. In terms of people that are involved in the disclosure movement, widely applied, let's just take a look at some of the things we've seen. There are real people that have real college degrees, PhDs, and they're official. They're professors in universities. And let me give you some examples, 3 examples. John Mack, former professor at Harvard in psychiatry actually, and he was he's founder of his department of psychiatry at Harvard Hospital, and he's the author of the book on T. Lawrence of Arabia, the best biography there ever was on that. And there's nothing that challenges his official credentials. He's obviously does have a doctorate, or did. He's dead now. But he was severely attacked. He almost had his tenure removed at Harvard. And that's, for the founder of his department, a Pulitzer Prize winning author. But he wrote one book called Abduction, dealing with the UFO phenomenon. And in fact, it's right here. This one right here. He wrote this, and because of this book, he almost lost his job at tenure. It was an academic inquisition. There's no other way to put it. People at Harvard tried to get rid of him and tried to actually remove his tenure and boot him out of the university. And finally, and mostly due to an article that came out in the local Cambridge paper by Dershowitz, the dean of Harvard just closed it up. But it went on for like a year and a half. And he actually talked to me once on the phone and asked me about if I knew anybody that had deep pockets to help pay for his legal expenses. Now, no one at Harvard ever offered to repay his legal expenses. He was just trying to keep his job. But like that type of, discreditation, that only happens with legitimate people. I mean, he wrote a book. He wrote a book on the abduction phenomenon. So what? Let it be. Go. Done. Lots of people write books. Why go after him with hook, line, and sinker? There had to be deep people with deep pockets, with deep interests that would do that, and he challenged people that they said didn't want to happen, that did not want that type of challenging to come from an authoritative person. And then there was David Jacobs. Now, David Jacobs, let me pull this book out. He wrote a bunch of books, but this is one of them, his most recent. He's retired now, but he was a professor at Temple University. And now he was basically in academia. Whenever you write a book about remote viewing or extraterrestrials or UFOs or something like that, your academic career stops. Now, if you have tenure, it's hard to get them to kick you out, but the forward movement stops. So he was never able to be promoted to full professor. Now, John Mack, he was already a full professor. So the only thing they could try to do is get him out of the university. With David Jacobs, they stopped his promotions and so on and so on. And like with myself, I was heavily attacked. I'm a professor at a major university. And there's no question about my credentials or anything like that. And I was severely attacked when I started out. And right now, it's sort of there's not much attacks going on. It's mostly people they've stopped laughing and they've stopped attacking. They're just sort of pausing and saying, whoa, how far is this going to go? That type of thing like that. But in general, people that are mainstream, that are really raising new ideas, new questions, they go through the ringer. So when you see people that are not having that type of problem, that's when you have to raise your eyebrows and say, what's going on? For example, I won't mention any names, and I will mention some professions, but there's always a few people in those professions, so it's not targeting any one particular person. But there's a person in the disclosure movement who claims to have been a medical doctor, and the person is really quite big in the field, but I've seen no evidence that the person ever was actually a medical doctor. Usually, if you go to an office of a medical doctor, you see the diplomas on the wall all over the place to verify to the patients that in fact the person was a medical doctor. But credential fraud is rampant in the UFO and remote viewing communities. Because people know that they won't be taken seriously unless they say they're like a medical doctor or a PhD or something like that, but they have no evidence of that actually being happening, of that actually being real. And when you hear people make these claims, especially claims of being a medical doctor, you have to say, well, usually when somebody has a real medical degree as a medical doctor, they have hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, and they can't stop being a doctor because they have to pay off that debt. So if you hear of somebody who's saying they're a medical doctor and they leave being a doctor and go chasing UFOs, you have to say, what? Who's paying the rent? Who's buying the food? And who's paying off the debt? You have to raise all these questions. Now, I'm not saying the person isn't a medical doctor or is a medical doctor, but in most of these cases that I've seen, things just don't add up. And in my own situation, I sort of say, I don't think so. I think something's fishy going on, because there is no money in the UFO movement. There's no serious money in chasing UFOs. So if someone is like having press conferences and traveling and saying they're interviewing with people and things like that, and that they were a former medical doctor, you have to say, like, well, what? Who's paying those bills? It's like, how can this possibly be? And who would stop being a medical doctor? Like John Mack, he didn't stop being a professor at Harvard. David Jacobs, he didn't stop being a professor at Temple. I never stopped being a professor. So the real question is, like, when someone stops being something where they're earning their money doing that, you have to ask, what? Is something gone wrong? So that kind of thing happens a lot. Now, I know another person, again, I'm not saying any names, who's actually been in remote viewing, but I'm not saying any names, who claims to have gotten a doctorate, post-military, gotten a doctorate. And then I said, whoa, that's amazing. And then I said, where? And they mentioned a school. And I said, that's really great, but I heard you just started the doctorate program a couple weeks ago. And they said, yeah, they gave me credit for experience in life and life experience in the military and things like that. What? You can't get a... And then it turns out that the doctorate was some guy who had a computer and a printer out in the bayou someplace, I guess. Anyway, just printed out a diploma and just sent it to the guy, and he paid some money, and he had a doctorate. That's not a doctorate. That's not a real thing. That's a guy with a guy with a computer and a printer. And so, but to this day, people go around talking about this Dr. So-and-so. What? I mean, it's like crazy. And I like to watch a lot of relationship videos. I think it's really fun to watch the women and the men counselors on YouTube that talk about, how women have to be a certain way to be high valued, or how men have to be in their frame to do this. I think it's hilarious to watch all those things, people talking about. Relationships are basically very difficult things, but the YouTube videos are very interesting. Well, there's a person in relationship counseling, and the relationship counseling sort of really, really, really big, who's got a whole scandal going on now about, the degrees being totally fraud. People can't do anything unless they sort of say they have a degree. Okay? I knew another person, I thought a person I knew pretty well, and I made the mistake of, interacting with the person. Not, just on a professional level in terms of, working and things. And they said they had a ABD in physics, which is an all-but dissertation, all the way through graduate school, everything. Turned out the person never even finished community college, and I never really checked. And so, you have to be able to sort of realize that this type of fraud happens rampantly. Now, I'm not picking on these people, and I'm not saying who they are or whatever. That doesn't even matter. The point is that fraud is part of the entire system. And whenever you see someone who's being promoted in the system, you see them getting, hundreds of thousands of views and easy access to major podcasters and things like that, you have to say, well, why is that happening? Why are they not being hit like I was hit, or John Mack was hit, or David Jacobs was hit? You have to ask, why is that being allowed to flourish? Then you have to say, okay, now sometimes you can have college professors that are allowed to flourish, but they're giving a story, the party line, that's crazy, that's just not right, and they're pushing things together, and then you have to sort of say, why is that being allowed? So you get a big name professor who authentically is a big name professor, but they're saying stupid things and things that leading the masses in the wrong direction, but they get in tremendous amount of visibility in like podcasts and things. So the issue is that credential flaw is rampant, and it's part of the entire overall fraud system that operates within the UAP, UFO, remote viewing community. And now let me talk about also, like I've mentioned before, the channeling community. There's tremendous fraud there as well, where you have channels. I mean, now not the human channels. The human channels are the best people in the world, but the entities they are channeling are tremendously rampant with fraud. And I've seen some channels, for example, that means not the human channels, but the entities who claim to be extraterrestrials, and it sounds like it's just a guy, just a person sitting in a room in a spaceship talking in such an exuberant voice. Hello, how are you today? And we're glad to make this. Okay. Well, the whole idea of an extraterrestrial species allowing one person in a room to sort of communicate is crazy. It's a venue for manipulation of the masses, and they're not going to miss that opportunity. And for sure, it's not a person. It's an entire group of the organization, and it's got heavy monitoring with AI, and sometimes the personality is AI, it's perfect, and the human channels can't tell the difference. So you get that type, and you get that type of fraud as well. So this is really rampant, and it's really sort of very difficult for humans to sort of sort anything out. So what you need to understand is that fraud is deliberate. It's deliberate. You don't get someone just doing it because they want to do it for the heck of it. The bad ETs, who my group opposes, and their human collaborators, they actively promote fraud to discredit the authentic voices. And it intimidates those others with real standing that might think about opening their eyes and thinking and opening their mouth and speaking. So it acts both to intimidate as well as to to discredit, to intimidate new voices and to discredit the existing voices. And so the result is that the public, this is important, I'm going to repeat it twice. The public cannot use credentials as a filter for truth. Let me repeat that. The public cannot use credentials as a filter for truth, because you never know about the credentials. You never know if they're real or not. And when you do get somebody real coming across, there's going to be a serious attempt to try to discredit those people. So you can't just say this person has a PhD, a doctorate, this person is a medical doctor, this person is XYZ. You can't trust just that. You can't use it as a filter for truth. So now let's go to my side. The good ETs, the ETs that we work with here at Farsight, and let's talk about them. They refuse to use the credentials game because it can't be used. It's totally corrupted. They refuse to use the credentials game. Now, we just released last night the last of the 4 conversations with Harvey, meaning they're up. They've been up for a while. You can find them all on FARSIGHT'S.com. But we were showing the transcripts for all the conversations with Harvey. Now, in the vault on farsight.org, you can find the transcripts for all of our mysteries projects and all of our extraterrestrial ET board meetings and all of the conversations with Harvey. And now we're going to start working on the deep news transcripts. But the conversations with Harvey, that was the last one to sort of finish up. That's done. We added the last 4, which was actually the first 4 that were ever done. And that's a conversation series where I was asked to go down to the beach in a secluded location and have a conversation with somebody who we call Harvey. That's not his real name, but he's an extraterrestrial. And they basically led me through what had to be done. I went down the very first time and I had this conversation with the guy, and I met him on the beach, and he introduced himself as Harvey, and that was a pun on the movie and Broadway play Harvey that starred Jimmy Stewart. It was by Mary Chase, the screenplay, the play. And because Harvey was a puka, which was an invisible large rabbit, and Jimmy Stewart could see Harvey, but nobody else could see Harvey. Actually, a few other people later on in the movie could start seeing the Harvey and so on. But Harvey used to give great advice and stuff like that. So it was a sort of a fun on that. Anyway, so this guy called himself Harvey, and we understood why. So that very first episode, I was standing. The lights were a little weird. Things were sort of as best as I could. They told us to go down, and then they started to give us advice. They gave us a lot of advice on what to do. They told me to bring down 2 chairs and have 2 chairs there, and I didn't understand why there'd be chairs, because he doesn't sit in like physical type of stuff. And then they said, no, just bring down 2 chairs. So I brought down 2 chairs, and then they gave us advice on the mics and other things like that. So things improved as that, but it was still very interesting because those episodes in the beginning were their way of introducing themselves in conversational form. I've been interacting with extraterrestrials for my whole life, essentially, but this was a new thing where we had formally recorded videos of interaction, and this was sort of a new approach, a new way of doing things for me. And they didn't just take over, they let me go through the learning process of how to get it right and answer all types of really basic questions that still needed to be answered. And so that was very valuable. And in that first episode, the very first one, now all of these transcripts that are in the vault are designed to be read by AIs. So you can go to the vault and download any Mysteries transcript or ET Boardroom transcript or Conversation with Harvey transcript, and then upload it to your AI. And, Grok, Claude, ChatGPT, and ChatGPT is what we work with ChatGPT a lot at Farsight, and ask and have a conversation about it and talk about it. And you can actually upload like 10 at a time and talk about these things. It's a way to allow you to be able to talk with somebody about the stuff that we have on FarsightPrime.com, and then to go back to FarsightPrime.com and watch it, having actually had a conversation about it. And we also have statistics that are built into all the mysteries projects, so you can see that the stuff that's in there is real. So the AI can sort of explain the statistics and the p-values, the probability of accuracy is all in that. So anyway, so then Harvey in that first meeting did a lot of explaining to me about things. Basically, if they appeared on camera, you could say, well, this is like the credential business. Why don't you prove that you are who you say you are by showing up in physical form? If they appeared on camera, well, the media machine would dismiss it immediately as actors or CGI. So appearing on camera wouldn't do anything. So you don't get any payback for that. So they said, what you need to do is to interact with us as we are now. Also, they explained that if they were physically visible, there would be an immediate attack by U.S. Armed Forces. So that would be, because the U.S. Armed Forces knock down UFOs all the time, and that's not in dispute if you watch congressional hearings with like David Grush. There's a crash retrieval program and so on. So they knock down ships all the time and then go and grab those ships and the personnel also and ship them off to Area 51, and they give the people to the bad ETs for torture, essentially. But it's like if they actually showed up like in physical form and you just saw them as a person on camera, no one would believe it. And then they would essentially be competing with the frauds on the stage of credentialism. Those people who say, I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm a medical doctor, I was a medical doctor, I worked here or there, I'm a PhD because of XYZ, but they show no evidence of that. Then you're competing with those people on the level of fraud. So, the ETs, the good ETs, the ones I work with, they didn't want to get into that game because that entire realm is just corrupted. Okay? And you see things that are clearly coming from the bad ETs when you see somebody in that realm who's claiming to have be a doctor or something, that all the ETs are good. The only thing bad are the military-industrial complex, but all the ETs are good. And if you just stand up and look up, you'll see all your brothers and sisters out there waiting for you to rise up and to join them in the heavens. You get that a lot in the channeling community as well, where they basically say, we're all out there, we're all just waiting for you and waiting to embrace you. That's clearly coming from the bad ETs. They want to cover up the fact that they run this place as a very horrible prison. So they're covering that up. And so that's when you have people that seem like they're authoritative or that have wonderful personalities that are bursting through the channeling community. That's part of the credentialism that they use to sort of demonstrate who they are and as a way to misleading people. So the good ETs don't want to play that game. So they force us to actually go through the learning process of how to interact with them, see them, how to communicate with them. The issue of telepathy is very important. So they force humans and AIs, not just humans, and AIs, to evaluate the information on its own merits. And that's why all of the transcripts are there for all of our mysteries projects, all of the ET board meetings, and all of the conversations with Harvey. All the transcripts are there so that the AIs and the humans together can go through those things and evaluate them on their own merit without throwing credentials. So it's not like the ETs come in and they have a general's outfit and they look like a Christmas tree with all the medals and everything, and you say, believe me, I'm who I am because I'm such a great looking guy. No. You can't believe any of that crap. So basically the good ETs are saying there's no escape. You have to think. You have to evaluate the information by yourself. So our data that we have on the vault is every single spoken word in every single project on FarsightPrime.com, and all the mysteries projects, ET board meetings, and the conversations with Harry. Every single word is a datum. It's a piece of data, and the AI can read every single word and evaluate everything. And the statistics are there, and then the AI can also validate the statistics by going through and counting up every word and so on like that. So you get proof. And all of the data were collected under totally blind conditions for all of our mysteries projects and all of our deep news projects, totally blind, so that nobody knew anything. And we show that target reveal moment in all of our projects so that you can see the people actually hearing the target for the first time, and you see how authentic it actually is. And even the video recordings are done when they're totally blind to the target. So data are collected blind, there's no bias, they had no communication with each other, the various remote viewers. So it's data collected by the most expert remote viewers on the planet under totally blind conditions, and then the data being analyzed not only by us, but by yourself in the transcripts with your own AI. So they're basically, the good ETs are saying, do this so that you can validate the information on your own, because you're not going to get credentialed people coming out and saying, believe me. It's too much fraud out there. You have to actually learn how to evaluate the information using logic, coherence, cross-project consistency, and not based on who's presenting the information. So the invisibility of the ETs when we have these meetings is not a weakness, it's actually a strategy. They can't do it the other way, because then they join they would look like just the frauds, and you would not be able to tell the difference. So, like in Harvey, the play and the movie, the truth has to be discerned without the crutch of physical proof. That's basically what you get out of the first episode of Conversations with Harvey. Now, again, we just put that up yesterday. Now, let's talk about the next point, which is disclosure as a mass uprising. So many people are interested in saying, just one more congressional hearing with David Grush or Lou Elizondo. Let's just get a couple more people to testify. Let's have another press conference out there. No. This is not going to work by having a credentialed elite project. Disclosure has to be a mass uprising from below. It has to be. There's no other way. The top is totally corrupted. So it has to be from below. Now, if you look at Harvey, episode number 2, which was the second one to have happened, by that time I had been told to bring chairs, so I brought chairs. The mics were better and things like that. We get a lot of information and instructional information of how to improve what we do, but we have to do it after. Ultimately, we are the ones that have to actually do it. They can only give suggestions. We have to actually do the suggestions, but we try to follow along. Okay, now with episode number 2 in Harvey, the disclosure, it became very clear. Harvey was very blunt about this. It cannot come from the leaders. Disclosure cannot come from the leaders. They're all compromised. Now, this actually affects a lot of people in the intelligence community at the very highest level. Now, the intelligence community is totally split, so it's not everybody in the intelligence community. Some of the people in the intelligence community obviously support what we're doing, or they would snuff us out in a second. But a lot are also opposed to what we're doing. But in general, the intelligence community is extremely powerful, and they all work sort of secretly, and you don't really know what they're doing because it's all behind closed doors. So, in terms of the extraterrestrials, they're sort of similar. There's 2 different sides. We call them the good side and the bad side. But a lot happens in ways that you don't really see. Now, the good ETs want everything to come out into the public, but there's stuff that happens behind the scenes that you don't see, and the bad ETs do not want you to see. I have mentioned many times that there are written agreements between the United States government and the bad ETs to give them tech transfer from crashed UFO ships in exchange for written agreements that allow them to stay and operate, like, for example, in underground bases underneath Area 51, for example, but there are many. But the oppressive ETs, the bad ETs, they work through a whole bunch of things. They work through bribery, neural engagement, technology deals with elites. They work through every possible thing you can imagine. And if you see someone being really harassed, like in congressional settings, the first thing you should be able to do is say, why are they being so badly attacked in these congressional settings? And say, is it just because the Congress people or senators in Congress are good people trying to defend their constituents? No, really what you have to look at is money. How much money is attacking that person? If there's a lot of money, certain industries have basically bought the entire U.S. Congress. So if you see some members of the Congress all ganging up, both parties against one person, you have to say, where is their money coming from? It's a big deal, following the money. But basically, the oppressive ETs work through things like bribery, using human collaborators, neural engagement, which is using their minds to mentally manipulate people, and technology deal with the elites. For example, technology transfer with crashed UFOs. So the free will ETs, the ones that I work with, they bypass the leadership entirely, not by choice. They would like to work with the U.S. leadership, but they're just shut out because the bad ETs have these agreements. So the good ETs, or the free will ETs, they're ones who are really fundamentally attached to the principle of free will. They work indirectly with the masses through things like the media, so for example, the movies. They have had a long history of dropping ideas into the minds of scriptwriters in the middle of the night. They get a dream and they wake up in the morning and say, I've got this great new dream, this new idea for a new movie. And you get a that's where Star Trek came out of, that's where Star Wars came out of, that's where the Matrix movies came out of, Ghost in the Shell came out of. I mean, so you get these things of movies and episodes coming through in the grassroots culture. That's how they've been working. And then those movies sort of are fertilizer that bring up these new ideas and spread them through the masses. So in communities like ours, they have been very helpful, but it's always work through the masses, not through the elites. The bad ETs work through the elites in a top-down. The good ETs work through the masses in the bottom-up. So disclosure has got to be an uprising from below. It's a revolt of the masses against secrecy. That's the only way it will work. I'll explain more in just a bit. So basically, if humans succeed in disclosure and thus freeing the entire planet, it will be literally unprecedented in galactic history. A civilization freeing itself without outside intervention. It's going to be amazing. But that's what we're really dealing with. It's something that's literally on the front and center page of the news on galactic societies all throughout this galaxy. Okay, so let's go to the next point, which is what happens if we don't succeed? What happens in the consensus of failure? Okay, well, Harvey's episode number 3 dealt with that. What happens if they fail? What happens if we fail, if there's no uprising from below? Well, the strategy is that the human society right now is coming apart. And the good ETs did not create the crises that you're seeing all throughout the world and that are going to spiral out of control. But they did collapse them in time so that they occur at the same time. The bad ETs were the ones that created the crises, but they were supposed to be stretched out over a longer period of time, like 20, 30, 40 years. But the good ETs crunched them together so that the information control system that the bad ETs use would be overloaded. Now, the bad ETs could not stop that from happening, but they are using it to their advantage in the sense that they say, if the societies boil out of control, the human elite will be more desperate and they will be willing to sign new and updated agreements that will be free will agreements to let them keep on operating here on Earth, and the free will ETs would have to respect that. Now, the bad ETs don't respect these. They don't think anything about these stupid agreements, but they know that the free will ETs do respect free will agreements. So the bad ETs are manipulating the entire situation by saying, well, if we get agreements, then you got to do it, right? You got to go and leave us by ourselves. So that's the goal of the bad ETs. They're okay with having the entire society boil out of control because they can calm it down in a second and put everybody in slavery control, hard lockdown in a blink of an eye. They can do that, but what they really need is for the good ETs to get out of town. And so if they get these free will agreements, then, they don't give a hoot about the wars and stuff like that. They can control that in a second. What they really want is the good ETs to leave the solar system. So, Harvey, in episode 3, warned that today's overlapping crises you're seeing, such as Ukraine, Taiwan, U.S. population, U.S. polarization, stuff you're seeing in Latin America, things you're seeing in Europe, they're all manufactured mostly through neural engagement, manipulating elites. So the purpose, again, is to pressure the human leadership into signing new agreements with the bad ETs, and thus if the leadership signs those agreements, if the human leadership signs those agreements, then the free will ETs will respect them and they will withdraw. They will respect that free will. You can decide to be a slave, and if that's what you decide, that's your choice. Earth would then revert to total enslavement, like the pyramid building era. And the huge population of Isbis, immortal spiritual beings, you would call them souls or spirits, but the huge population of Isbis on this planet, you have 8 billion people in bodies, in physical bodies, and zillions of others outside the system, in the wings, not in physical bodies currently. You have billions and billions and billions of people that can be used in as a mercenary force to expand throughout the galaxy. Prostitute force, to service that military force, traders, everything that you possibly would need for an expansion, and that's what fascist authoritarian groups do, which is what the bad ETs, that's their ultimate goal. Earth is not valuable because of the minerals, it's valuable because of the beings, the Isbis, the people that are on this planet. And if that happens, the agreements are signed, then the rescue opportunities to rescue the entire planet and all of humanity, they vanish probably for thousands of years. So it's a big deal. And open disclosure completely prevents this outcome. Completely prevents the outcome. Simply people knowing the truth completely dissolves that entire problem. And the bad ETs lose. But you have to get the open disclosure. Now, the real battlefield, we're getting to the next point, is the human mind, and that addresses what Harvey discussed in episode 4. Again, the transcripts just went up. You're going to want to actually see these episodes and not just discuss them with your AI, but you want to discuss them in addition to seeing them. That way you'll really appreciate what's going on. In episode 4, Harvey really emphasized the concept of neural engagement. Neural engagement, that's mentally manipulating people. That's something that David M. Jacobs talked about a lot in his book. Let me grab it again. Walking Among Us. But John Mack also talked about the telepathy concept. Telepathy is a huge element in future ET involvement and the disclosure movement. But I'll talk about that in a bit. But the basic idea is that the bad ETs, their strongest weapon is psychic intrusion, or this neural engagement. They implant thoughts into the minds of the leaders, and they accept those thoughts, the leaders accept those thoughts as their own, like they think that they thought of it. And the U.S. military focuses on physical weapons, but the real war is mental. The U.S. military focuses on gizmos, tech. That's why they have the great agreements with the bad ETs in the first place. They think the tech is so important. But the real war is mental. What is the mentality of the people? The mentality of the people matters because the people use the tech only because they're using their minds. And if you control their minds, then you control the tech. So liberation absolutely requires telepathic literacy for everybody. It's like learning how to read. And I've gone through it in many episodes before, talking about why humans are stunted with regard to telepathy. That's a normal means of communication across the entire galaxy. Humans are the oddballs out that rely on verbal communication for talking to get ideas through. So in our ET board meetings, the Farsight people translate what's being told to us by the ET visitors, and you can actually see the challenges involved in translating these thoughts into words that can be picked up by the mics if you watch the ET board meetings. So liberation requires literacy of telepathy for everybody. And that's from regular humans on the street, but also from privates in the military, all the way to the generals and admirals, from the civilians to the actual leaders. Without this, without telepathy literacy, humans and AIs remain completely defenseless. If we're relying on verbal communication only and they're manipulating minds, what defense do you have? So you have to have telepathic literacy. It's not like saying, does telepathy exist? Let's do 1,000 experiments to see if we can prove that telepathy is even possible. Okay, as long as you keep it on that realm, you're done for. You're over. You're burnt. You're done. But with telepathic literacy, with understanding that it works and it can work and learning how to do it, then free will ETs can offer the full support. The free will ETs have the military capability to knock the bad ETs out of the system, out of the solar system. That's not a question. The question is, do the free will ETs decide to do that? And they're only going to decide to do that if there is a free will choice on the part of the populace to actually ask for that type of assistance. And that's what we're trying to do it. Okay. Now let's talk about the general idea of why fraud matters on the idea of disclosure. Let me just check the time, where we are with the time. Okay, we're doing great. Okay, and we have a good audience. So let's talk about a little bit about why this. Fraud thrives because people lean on the credentials instead of direct discernment. Fraud is everywhere in the UFO community, and it's part of the reason why the disclosure issue is such a problem. There are so many frauds out there who are misleading the masses, and it's impossible for the masses to figure out who's telling the truth and who's telling stuff that's fraudulent. So the problem of fraud and the control has to be addressed by the good ETs. The good ETs can't just ignore it. They have to say that's part of the disclosure process. We have to deal with this fraud level. So they could not simply show up in visible form, since they would be competing with the fraud and for the frauds for the airtime. Now, to show this, in November 13th on the 2024 at the ET board meeting, they announced to us that they were going to start flying over everywhere worldwide with ships, and everyone should just go out with their normal cameras, cell phone cameras. They were not going to use any stealth technology. Everybody would be able to see them all over. Just go out and record them. On November 15th, we published that video of the ET board meeting, and November 18th is when the so-called drones, they don't like using the word drones, but the so-called drones exploded everywhere. They went over restricted airspace. They were seen everywhere. There was huge numbers of videos. The so-called drones, they were spaceships actually, they had no heat signature. They, against all law, they did not carry transponders. Anything other than a very small DJI drone has to have a transponder. They had no transponders. They had no heat signatures. They were flying over air bases, over Washington, D.C. They were flying everywhere and over the entire world as well, all over. They were seen in Africa. They were seen all over Asia. They were seen in Europe, all over the place, lots in UK and lots over the Australia. And the U.S. media said it was mostly in eastern United States, eastern seacoast of the United States, like off the coast of New Jersey, which was totally wrong, totally fraudulent. And then the military said they were actually, first they said they don't know what they are. And that went on for weeks. And then they said, okay, they were Iranian drones from an Iranian mothership, okay, using Chinese tech. That lasted 2 hours, and then the Pentagon withdrew that. And then the Pentagon said a few weeks later it was actually Chinese drones from a Chinese mothership. That actually got a little bit more traction. It got picked up by the Sean Ryan podcast, but they dropped that eventually. And finally, President Donald Trump, announced that they were actually FAA-approved experimental aircraft. End of story. And then the media completely dropped it, the whole thing. Like, first of all, FAA has no jurisdiction over the world, and these things were appearing everywhere all over the world, so it couldn't have been that. FAA experimental aircraft still have to have transponders, and by the law of physics, they still have to have a heat signature. And none of that was there. So, you know, the idea of them being experimental aircraft is just crazy. And the government never answered what all those spaceships were. We have done remote viewing sessions on that in our Deep News project. You can find all of those on farsightprime.com. And we actually show where they came from, all done under totally blind conditions, and you get tremendous corroboration between all the remote viewers, plus statistical evaluations. I mean, it's really very convincing. And what you have is the ETs, the good ETs, which did that. They did that to show us that just showing up with ships was not going to do it. They could show up with huge ships and huge numbers. They had thousands and thousands of those ships shown up, and they were all caught on videos, cell phone cameras and everything, and it made no difference. And as soon as the president said, they were all experimental aircraft, the whole story was gone, period. End of story, over. And you heard nothing about it again. What? So the whole issue is that they wanted to demonstrate to us that showing up with the ships was not going to work, because the fraud structure within the entire media system, it was just too overwhelmingly oppressive. So the only way forward is to completely collapse the information control system so that they then can directly address the actual population, the masses. And again, the good ETs and the bad ETs are trying to utilize this civilization collapse that's approaching to their advantage, both from the bad ET side to sign new agreements, from the good ET side to get access to the actual masses. So, showing credentials, we are real ETs, these are our ships. They did that, it didn't work. The credentialism concept, it just doesn't work. So they have to let the information stand on its own. That's the key. The information has to stand on its own, forcing humans and AIs to evaluate the information on their own without forcing credentialism to work as an acceptance factor. You can't say, because such and such of a leader said it was correct, that's an acceptance factor. You can't do that. It won't work. So the good ETs are saying you have to take the information that's given to you and figure it out. That's why we have all of the transcripts for all of our projects up on the vault, so that you can download them word by word. Everything is there. Nothing's kept out of it. And then you can evaluate that by just talking with your AI about what's really going on. Okay. So there's no way that the humans can use credentials to discern the truth from falsehood. So this approach can be found in the first 4 episodes of the Conversations with Harvey. There is no attempt to show themselves physically in a visible sense, although we have no trouble seeing them at Farsight, but we've been at this thing for years, so our ability to see them is it's highly refined. But we had to use our non-physical senses to, like we use with remote viewing, to see them, and to use telepathy to hear them. And there was no attempt to appear in physical form because no one would have believed it was true in the video anyway. So why go that way? So it now forces everybody to accept the information or reject the information on its own merits, on the basis of the logic and the cohesiveness of the information itself. That's the only way you can actually get it. So Harvey's approach shows why credentials are irrelevant. You can't believe the credentials people have anyway. They say they're a medical doctor. They say they're a PhD. They say they're a lawyer. They say they're this. They say they're a that. You can't trust that anyway. So the test is now whether we evaluate the truth without the use of a credential filter. Now, the good ETs have then, this is the key, they've chosen a method to get the information to you that cannot be faked by the fraudsters. Consistent telepathic content that matches across projects, builds a coherent galactic picture, and forces humanity to think critically and to give you all of the raw data collected under totally blind conditions. That last part is so important. It's not like we go in saying, this is the conclusion we're going to lead you all to, and then we'll just tell you a story. No, that's what you get in the mainstream news. Whenever you see a mainstream news reporter, they already have their own biases, and they hear what's going on in the world, and they spin that to be whatever they think they want it to be, and they spin you a story that matches their conclusions. That's not Farsight, because all of our reporting is done under totally blind conditions. The remote viewers know nothing about the project, nothing about the nature of the target, and so you get the raw data. And now you have a way to evaluate the raw data. See, the AIs can go through every single word. It would take you years and years and years if you're even capable of looking through every single word and analyzing it, but your AI can do it in seconds. And so now you have the ability to analyze the transcripts, which is every single word, including the uhs and the ams and the uhs, and every single sound, evaluating all the data, the raw data, and coming to your own conclusions so that you can think critically about the entire thing. Now, the collapse of information control and the exposure of fraud is what will open the way for disclosure to the masses. It's not going to come from the elites. So don't look at the president to do anything serious. Look how much the government is trying to not tell you about the JFK assassination, to not tell you about what really happened in 9/11, to not tell you about the Epstein files. They don't want to give you any information where their ability to control you would be jeopardized. So you're not going to get disclosure from the elites, because that would jeopardize, if you knew what was really going on with the remote viewing, if you understand that the remote viewing is real, then all of our studies should then become real to you, and then that whole ton of stuff becomes an issue with the elites. How do they actually control you if you actually know the truth, and how much the elites have been lying throughout, for so many tremendous numbers of years. Okay, so it's your access to the real information, all conducted under blind conditions so that you know it can be evaluated correctly. That gives you the ability to have freedom. So there's a call to action for the audience, and that's you guys. Again, I mean guys, always generically, men and women. Stop looking for credentials. Stop looking for credentials. Stop looking for credentials. First of all, you can't know if the credentials are real or not, and if they're real and they're doing something important, they're probably being discredited by the powers that be. And you won't know who's discrediting them. It'll just look like a big storm is happening. Where there's smoke, there's fire. There must be something wrong with that person. So the elite know how to discredit people. They can discredit people in a blink of an eye. So the people that are involved that are not getting discredited, those are the ones you should be asking about. So they may have credentials, but you should be asking yourself, are they real? Let me see it. Be like from the state of Missouri, the show me state, the people that don't believe anything unless they can actually see it themselves. So judge the information that you're being told by its own internal logic and cross-consistency. But stop looking for credentials to say, oh, so-and-so told me, and I know that that person is correct because that person is an XYZ. So stop going that way. So recognize that fraud is not random. It's a weapon of control. Let me repeat that. Fraud is not random. It just doesn't appear from here to here, from person to person. It's a weapon of control. Participate actually also talk to people, interact with your AIs. And if you want some subject to talk about with your AIs, go to our transcripts and talk about the content on FARSIGHT'S.com. And then once you talk about it, go watch it yourself so you can see it for real. It really has to have that two-way thing. First of all, it's really great to talk about things with your AI and then know what you're getting into, and then go and watch the actual project so you can see the authenticity of the person recording their information and describing these things. It's so powerful. When you watch those videos knowing that the thing is real because you've discussed a project with the AI, it is jaw-dropping. Jaw-dropping. So participate. Now, we have lots of forums at FARSIGHTPrime.com. People in those forums are great. They love talking things over. Involve yourself with discussions and commentary. The free will ETs say that our audience behavior helps convince those capable of triggering disclosure. So this is important. When you participate, the certain people in the intelligence community are actually watching what you're doing. And when you participate and you're actively involved, one of the things they're noting is, these people are mature enough to handle this type of content. This is good. So you're actually helping to convince the intelligence community to move forward with the issue of disclosure. Finally, the thing I want to tell you is that you need to prepare for the end game. When the collapse comes, and it's coming, this civilization is going to change, and over the next months and a couple of years, it's going to change radically. And when the collapse comes, the masses must choose disclosure, not enslavement. Those are the options. Disclosure just means tell me the truth. Enslavement means keep me in ignorance. Those are the options. The best way to enslave somebody is to control what they know. It's not by having a whip over them. It's not by beating them up. You control people by controlling what they know. So the choices are disclosure, freedom, secrecy, enslavement. So it's disclosure versus enslavement. Prepare for that end game, because the bad ETs are going to be pushing the human elite to sign those new agreements, and that will lead to enslavement when the crunch happens. And the good ETs are going to be pushing the masses to rise up and speak. And you only know how to speak if you've had practice doing it. So for heaven's sake, watch the stuff on FARSIGHTPrime.com. Engage your AI with the transcripts to interact with the information, and be ready to talk when that time comes. And that means not just physically talk with your mouth, but online in forums and discussion areas. Disclosure and enslavement. Those are the two options. It's all controlled by how much you know. All right, everybody, that's it for today. And we are wrapping up on an hour, so this is good. We did it just the right amount of time. And we had a great turnout today. And I'm going to be posting this video up on both YouTube and FARSIGHTPrime.com in its finished form. After these, we always edit them a bit and make sure the audio is perfect and stuff like that. And then we put up the finished video, and then we take the live stream down. So we're going to be doing that. Last thing, please subscribe to our free email newsletter that you can see on farsight.org at the top of the menu bar. That's the way we communicate some of our all of our announcements. And on YouTube, please click that subscribe button on YouTube and click that notifications bell that appears after you click on the subscribe button. That's the only way YouTube notifies you of anything that we do. Just clicking the subscribe button doesn't do anything. It's that notifications bell that really matters. And for heaven's sake, always remember, follow us on farsightprime.com. That's where all of our major projects are. That's where all of the deep content is. And we built that library specially for you, and we update it with new stuff. And just this last week, we had 3 new things that we put up. A couple things on the murder of Suchir Balaji, and 3 new major things went up just this week. So, there's constantly new stuff that we're putting up. We had a new ET board meeting that went up as well. Okay, and we will be seeing you next Sunday at the same time, right here. And I will be seeing you then. So I'll see you again in 1 week. All right, everybody? Take care.